Okay, and here we lead in on part 4. Christine Hayes here, Yale Scholar, giving a comparative religion studies, and we'll just get right into it. Hopefully you've watched the first 3. If not, at the end of each one of these, number 1 will be up in the top right-hand corner of a few of these. Top left-hand corner is always going to lead us to the next one, and so on. 1 to 2, 2 to 3, 3 to 4, and if there's a 5th, it'll lead on to that. Let's see if we can get this done, though. It's got about 12 minutes left, and I'm not sure I'll contain all of it.
There are striking resemblances between the biblical God of the patriarchs and the Canaanite god El. El is the head of the council of gods. He is said to have a long white beard. He dwells on a mountain top in a tent. His epithets include father of all creatures, bull, king. He is also described as the protector of patriarchs, patriarchal figures, a god of the father of the clan, it says in the text. He guides them, he protects them, he promises them descendants. Many biblical passages depict God exactly this way, as the head of a council of divine beings. He's occasionally described with some of the epithets that are associated with El. He's referred to as the father of all creatures. There are poetic passages in which he is referred to as bull, also certainly as king. And in the patriarchal narratives, God refers to himself as the God of the Father. I am the God of the Father, the same way El is referred to. He guides
reference.
and protects the patriarchs. He makes promises of progeny to Abraham and his heirs. He also is associated with a mountaintop, Sinai, and gives instructions for the building of a tabernacle, a tent-like structure in which he will dwell. Many personal and place names in the patriarchal narratives are compounds in which one element is El. Yisrael, Yishmael, Beth El. El is the God of the patriarchs. By contrast, after the time of Moses, Israelite names start to be formed using Yah or Yahu as part of the name Yahweh. Elijah in Hebrew is Eliyahu. So you start to have theophorics, names that use the name of a deity, which are using forms of Yahu instead of El.
And if you want to look at just a few of these, you say Elijah, right? And that's weird. Elijah means El is Yahweh. Eliyahu, El is Yahweh. That's what that means. Bealiah, if you know the name in the Bible, all right? That's Baal is Yahweh. So now we're just going to start clumping them all in. Yasherah and El Shaddai, God Almighty's God of them titties, and it goes from there where it starts pulling in together, and the fierce warrior of a knot and all that, it gets assimilated.
There are other descriptions in the Bible of God, which are much more reminiscent, however, of the storm god, Baal. According to Canaanite mythology, Baal defeated El and assumed his position at a certain point as the head of the Canaanite pantheons.
This also happened when Zeus took over from the Titans. If you'll remember, this is the same rolling in of that same storm god with his lightning bolts. God does the same thing on Sinai and rolls in with lightning and thunder and things, and actually speaks to Moses in thunder. If you read it correctly, whenever he's supposed to respond and show the people he's there, he does so in thunder, and Moses interprets it and tells them people that have to stay back or he's going to kill every one of you. And then he goes up on the mountaintop and is gone for his series. But let's continue.
So there was a switch in Canaanite mythology from El to Baal becoming supreme. Like Baal, Yahweh is said to ride on the clouds. We have a poetic passage in which that's the case. His revelations are accompanied by thunder, storms, earthquakes. Baal is the god of the storm. There are poetic fragments also that allude to Yahweh's victory over watery foes, and that is a motif that's associated with Baal, who does...
Lightning is also a part of it too, but then we have the storm gods. How about Leviathan? Funny, it's that name too, it kicks it. It's Leviathan. It's got Levi right in the first of it, right? Leviathan. So now whenever he kills Leviathan off and the people around the sea, that would mean something different. And the lords of the sea, that would end up meaning something totally different. And of course the Canaanites had this thing where they had conquered the sea. So this is two different viewpoints on a similar situation, isn't it? A little bit?
Battle with the Yam, with the sea. And finally, also associated with Israel's God, we have ancient Near Eastern holy war traditions. God is depicted as a warrior who leads his host, the Lord of hosts, in battle. He's armed with spear and bow and arrows. The worship practices of ancient Israel and Judah clearly resemble what we know of Canaanite and ancient Near Eastern worship practices. Canaanite religious ritual took place in small temples that housed cultic statues. There were stone pillars, perhaps symbols of the gods or memorials to the dead. There were altars for animal sacrifices, cereal, liquid sacrifices. Similarly, Israel's God was worshipped at various high places. They're referred to as elevated or high places. These were shrines with little altars, maybe cultic pillars, and wooden poles.
She didn't misspeak there, the Israel's gods, until a certain point, until a much later point. And she talks about their poles, the wooden poles, what she just said, wooden poles?
Poles. The word for a wooden pole that's used in the Bible is Asherah.
And sadly, the Queen of Heaven is relegated to a pole they talk about as somehow holding up the tabernacle and so on. Later they talk about them chopping them all down and that they were somebody that was worshipped, and you definitely see that in the passages. But let's continue.
These shrines may have been associated with some kind of contact with ancestors, some kind of cult of the dead. Now, worship at these local altars and high places will come to be banned. Deuteronomy is going to polemicize against this. Deuteronomy will insist that all worship must occur in one central sanctuary, and these outlying areas and their asherot are to be destroyed. It will decree the destruction of all of these altars and high places.
This is an echo, too, they have in the Jacob's time, where they built the different shrines and stuff over across the river and so on to spread the religion. And for some reason, then it's looked at as they didn't want to. They have to all come here. And that's, of course, because everybody has to tithe their goods and give the excess here. They can't be giving the excess to you. The excess comes to us. It's what that kind of showed, too. And again, it reflects again.
The patriarchal stories are clearly not the work of the Deuteronomist.
No.
And these stories must have had very long-standing traditional authority.
Yep.
If they were adopted without serious modification by the Deuteronomist redactor, some modification, but not
some modification, but not serious. Maybe a little more serious than people are led to believe, though. And look at that concerned look, like she knows a lot more than she's letting on. And I'm trying to let you know some of it here in this video.
Serious. So what is going on here? What are we to make of the incredible similarity of Israel's deity and cult to those of her neighbors? How are we to understand the rise of Israel's God, Israel's religion? Well, so far we've had two models that have been thrown out to you. The kind of classic evolutionary model. From polytheism's worship of many gods, there's a natural evolution to henotheism's denial of all gods, but elevation of one God to a supreme position. Sort of one comes to be favored, and then eventually becomes so important to the others really fall away, and you have really the denial of all gods but the one.
So she didn't misspeak whenever she said denial. It's kind of that way, but it's not really. It's their importance. Now this actually is a weird reflection of Sumerian again, where they had a god of each city, the major cities that were there, and there were other gods that were there, and sometimes there were multiples. But in each one of these cases, it seemed to get very sectioned out to where each one had their own special shrines in special cities. And this also was reflected in the Roman and Greek stuff and how they have certain things, but then they need a temple to where you don't have to come all the way up here to get it. So here's the temple of Saturn down here, and now we've got that. Now we've made a satellite. Now we've got a franchise going of them and so on, and it keeps going from there. And the connections to Saturn with a ball and El and the entire worship there are incredible. It's exactly what it is. In fact, the ancient Phoenician word for the wandering star that we call today Saturn was Israel. And it's the most high because it's the farthest away. And being the farthest away that we can visible without a telescope, it is the most high. And of course, hold on, we thought that we were in a little glass bubble on a flat sheet with four pillars, and no, we knew that's not true. The ancient Greeks knew the world was round and even measured it and stuff off of shadows on the longest day of the year and things. I've got that in a video, or 4 of them. probably by now. But in doing so, they knew the world was round. Of course, you see an eclipse and it's round going over it. And people that try to still believe in a flat Earth today talk about all these weird ways they could pull that off, but never how that maybe it is just round. But let's continue so we don't draw that out stupidly.
We saw Kaufman in the 1930s reacted against this. He argued that monotheism and polytheism are so radically distinct that one could not possibly have evolved from the other. Sure.
Yet, I don't think that's a good true statement, because we watch the Romans, who they have a Greek pantheon that matches theirs, and the same thing with their gods and Olympus and the whole 9 yards, literally pretty much drop their religion for Sol Invictus, the undying sun, and they had gone through their Jesus thing, and there they go. And then these people that couldn't get their crap together, apparently they had a Jesus and an undying sun god, which the sun reaches its lowest point in the sky, falling by 1 degree per day in the fall that we call of it. And as it falls, it goes 1 degree per day, reaching a maximum low at December 21st, stays still for 3 days, and then begins to rise again. It's right near a sign called the Southern Cross, if you're down in this low area of the world, and you can see it. And therefore, the ancient story was the Son of God was killed and died on the cross on December 21st, and 3 days later he rose again to save all mankind from a nuclear winter, and still does so, and he's the undying sun and doesn't change per year. We have clocked the world around it, and even though other gods are all over the place doing different stuff, this one doesn't change. This one is the one that leads everything, for everything works off of that, and that it's the center of the universe, not Earth, right? And sun worship was the first pretty much worship, and a middle thing, and here it is again, and it's there at the end, and ta-da, and it makes the world go around. It evaporates water and makes clouds, so it makes the storm god. You can see how somebody would go to a storm god in a time of great drought, and you're starting to want a storm. So next thing you know, you want to piss God off just a little bit, or no, you've got to sacrifice your children to make it rain, and crazy stuff. And the American Indians, rain god, rain ceremonies and stuff. Anyhow, let's go.
Really, there's an element of truth in both models.
More in one than another.
The evolutionary model is, I think, responding to and picking up on the fact that in many respects, Yahweh resembles the gods of Israel's neighbors. To be blunt, the patriarchs seem to have worshipped the Canaanite god El.
And that's more blunt than, hey, we are willing to let people speak about today, but she just throws it right out there. Apparently, that's what this religion is. It's the same thing thrown together from a Babylonian origin, drawing those two together, saying, well, that's still one anyhow, and that's the same thing. And Egypt has attachments to it. So do these Greco-Romans. And the New Testament shows you, hey, this is where it's going. This is where it's evolving into. Here's the torch passing. Here's who it is. Let's continue.
The problem with the evolutionary model is that it doesn't account for those aspects of the biblical text that show a clear polemical relationship between Israel's religion and that of her neighbors. We saw when we read Genesis 1 that there was something going on there. There's a polemic going on. Right? There are strata within the Bible that are clearly polemicizing against certain kind of mythological presentation of the deity.
And it does so because they didn't want people to see their version of a god anymore either. It was this cow thing. They told them to quit doing it at Sinai. Quit going for the cow, and now you have to worship rams. Well, what is the symbology with all this? Okay, well, here, let me give you a quick one. It started way back in Leo and Taurus, and as we go through zodiacal times, which are about 2160 years apart, we went from Leo to Taurus, and they're all sacrificing bulls. And right about the time we're talking about, 2100 BC or so, at the major juxtapoint of this, then you would say that's somewhere around the time that we would have switched into the time of Aries, right? And which is named for a ram and the god of war, but also Arians makes it out of that. and R, the river R of the Egyptians, and Ares, if you will. And then you have an idea of it going for 2160. Well, what happens after that? Well, then we start to go into the time of Pisces, right? And they tried to knock the exact time in the Bible as being Christ's birth, and that's where that comes from. And they're off a little bit there, and everybody knows that now too. But and it could be as much as 6 years. It flips around and everything. People get into a big fight because there's cusps and things that happen leading into and out of each zodiacal time, and what really counts, and all that type of thing. But you can see that reflected in Jesus becoming a fisher of men, and he takes fish and turns them into mini baskets. And even the symbol we have today is a symbol of a fish, which is really a Vesica Pisces, and people aren't even catching it. It's just right there, just in your face, and what that connotation and geography and things have to go along with it. So, and now, by the way, we're on the dawning of the age of Aquarius and already in the cusp of it, and it happened right about in the 1950s, and look how the world is becoming incredible. And by unbabylizing ourselves and all starting to have a common language again, which looked at as being bad in the Bible, now we're doing incredible things getting with each other again, like what happened in primordial times, the Silk Road, and all those things that pretty much got disintegrated for 1500 years or more, and then come back together due to big conquest and things. Now we're in a dawning of a new age. Let's continue though.
By contrast, Kaufman's revolutionary model focuses almost exclusively on the dissimilarities and the polemical relationship between Yahwism and Canaanite polytheism. So the revolutionary model also fails because it doesn't acknowledge the many, many areas of contact, similarity, and even identity.
So that model does fail. The secondary one where he's like, oh, it couldn't have been this, it couldn't have been that, when everybody else is going, look at the information here. Rosh Hashanah showed us a whole lot. And again, that's just the top of the Tigris and Euphrates running right up into the top of the Levant and Anatolia area. So
a third way, another from the last 20 years or 15 years or so, and it's one that seeks to avoid this dichotomy between polytheism and monotheism. Instead of viewing Israelite religion as an evolution from and a refinement, just this natural process of refinement of Canaanite religion,
a distillation,
or as a radical break with and polemic against Canaanite religion, you have some biblical scholars, Mark Smith is among them, Stephen Geller, who examine the cultural and ideological negotiations that gave rise to Israelite monotheism. What do I mean? Mark Smith specifically describes the origin and development of Israelite religion as a process of what he calls convergence and differentiation.
Convergence is an odd term, and it comes about in biology. It's where you might have a green vine snake in Africa and you might have one in the Amazon, and they look exactly alike, and it takes somebody who really knows what they're doing to tell you which one may be which. But other than that, you can't tell the difference, yet they're not even genetically connected to each other. Maybe way, way back, but not anywhere real close. It's not like a few hundred generations ago somebody slung one over here, that was pregnant. It's a different type of thing in convergence. Well, you see that in all these religions that are around it, all having this common thing in this pantheon deal, and then it breaking down into other things more. It changes, it evolves, it builds more. In fact, if we look far enough back at it, their pantheons were much smaller, and they grew as generations grew, and people were deified and added into the pantheons, great people through time. And indeed, it's ancestor worship in most all of these situations.
He writes, convergence involved the coalescence of various deities and or some of their features into the figure of Yahweh. There is a period of convergence and blending of the deities. By contrast, he describes differentiation as a process whereby Israel came to reject its Canaanite roots and create a separate identity. At some point, there was a desire to separate, and in that process of identity formation, a polemic began to develop that created Yahweh in a distinct way, and differentiated from the Canaanite.
And it does differentiate it from the Canaanite. And if you've watched my series on Genesis and its Sumerian connections, that is that dissension also. It kind of shows you where it's exactly following their model, and then saying, well, it's like this, not that, right? But using their model. And that's what she's kind of referring to here, that it's like, well, it's based on their thing and the religion, the temple thing. The temple that they say sacred with a certain setup to it is somebody else's temple that they knew was sacred and set up, and so they had it set back up that way. Or is this not some of the same people just kind of lost themselves? And you'll find that people changed over time and got kicked out of that area, and whenever they put them back from Babylon, different people ended up in different places. And it happened way back too at the time of Sargon of Akkad, and it had happened before then whenever a great flood happened in Sumeria that was really said to never supposed to happen again. See if there's another value point in this before we end it.
Deities. So let's consider Smith's convergence first. The Canaanite roots of Israel's ancestors are clear. The Hebrew language itself is essentially Canaanite dialect.
She admits Canaanite is Phoenician. Hello.
The Canaanite god El was, from the biblical text, the god of Israel's earliest ancestors.
Yep.
Through a process of convergence, he argues, the god Yahweh is a god that we think originally came from a region further south, Sinai, Edom, somewhere further south. But this god, through a process of convergence and cultural mixing, began to take on the characteristics of other deities, first El, and then Baal, or sort of simultaneously El and Baal. Later, certain aspects of this convergence would be polemicized against and rejected, as a Yahweh-only party sought to differentiate itself from those that it would now label as other and call Canaanites, as distinct from Israelites.
So what we have here is basically a mocking, and then to keep it from looking exactly like it, because that's funny. You say Yahweh and they say El, but his wife is the same name, his son's the same thing, everything else is the same. In fact, you're in their old temple. What's going on here? So they just change the name on the temple and knock down one of the statues and go, no, know what you're talking about, and just go from there. But in that process, it's rejected the feminine out of religion. And of course, the Catholics pulled it back in with Mother Mary. They give her so much credence, and everybody hates on that somewhat. But really, that's the mother of God. That's God, and there's God's wife, and then there's God's baby. And that's the Trinity that happened, and it all happened. And it goes back to Kronos, who had sacrificed his only begotten son named Eudid, and they named the land after him, which is Judea. And they didn't have a J before way after 1300 AD. And so, yeah, I got to ask, where would Judea be on this map? And who were Jews? And his only son was Eudid, and if you take it into ancient Attic Greek, that becomes Esus. And since there's no J again, it wonders who Jesus was supposed to have been mocking. And again, now they're giving him the God that they lost from their own religion, from the Canaanite people, back to him again as Jesus again, and let it reenact itself for him in a book form that had happened after the fact of Titus coming in and destroying the temple during the revolt from 66 to 73 AD, which ended in what we now know as Armageddon. And that was ended by a man that came in on 4-horse chariots named Titus. And he came into the city on a white horse. And all the dragons and Rome and all that goes along with it is definitely about them and how it had changed to there. It was showing you the deity they had. They like the Egyptians, called themselves gods on earth, and God's representatives and so on earth. And so that's where it led into in the Roman Catholic Church, and where the religion got adopted into and taken to its next levels that we all still go today. And it's a definite blending of really all of those together. And its reality is shown today in one book that comes actually from many. Like, share, subscribe, guys. Peace. That's going to do it for this one. She's got a few more things to say, but I think that's a good one on that. And we'll go. Peace.